I swim 2.5 kilometers a day. I walk, I exercise all the time. I am in a synchronized swimming team.
Manspreading is when a man spreads his physical body to take up as much space as humanly possible.
Contrary to popular belief, your body needs food to provide energy for basic functions. That's science.
All white people are racist, all men are misogynistic, all cisgender people are transphobic.
I'm tired of you stealing my life. I'm tired of you making me feel if I'm good or bad. I'm tired of you deciding how my day is. No more of you deciding my life.
What world does 77 cents equal $1?
If you shut the fuck up and let me read my list, there's the fucking proof.
How does it feel to be the same sex as Donald Trump?
There it was. There I was thinking it was just me that had a problem, but it turns out it's the air conditioning that's sexist.
Oi mate, you got a lighter, don't you? You don't mind if I borrow it?
Modern age feminism. Man, what a comedic wreckage it has been for the last couple of years. And I've been enjoying that wreckage a lot. It's been very enjoyable. Now, maybe their nonsense has gone a bit too far, so I thought I'd educate myself on the ways of the feminist. Go back through time and see how the fuck did this happen? Honestly, like, you saw that last 2 minutes. How the fuck did feminism become this?
Pretty. What the I'm not the pretty helpless princess in distress.
Jesus Christ, something is wrong with people in this day and age, I swear. So, I'm gonna mansplain some feminist history to you, briefly of course. Let's go on the journey together. The first wave of feminism started around the early 1800s, after the European woke period. The themes centered around the first wave were suffrage, equal contract and property rights, and opposing ownership of married women by their husbands, along with some other shit. One could argue it officially started in 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention, where 300 men and women rallied for equality. The Civil War slowed down the movement considerably, but soon after it gained traction. It didn't hurt that the newly implemented 15th Amendment in 1870 made a couple of Karens get pissy at the notion that former slaves would be granted suffrage before them. Unfortunately, the race to grant suffrage was won by New Zealand, a colony at the time, in 1893, followed by Australia, the first country, in 1902. Now, Australia and America did this parallel where they excluded native women in suffrage. And in Australia's case, they included New Zealand Maori over native Australians. So that makes a whole lot of sense, and I'm sure the government had a good reason for doing that. So another war slowed down the movement considerably again. During this time period, women played an invaluable role in keeping industry afloat. And after the Great War, there was mountains upon mountains of support for suffragists. So in 1920, white women were granted suffrage. Now, this would have included black women if not for those damn Confederates that whipped out the damn dick card and slapped it on the table during the vote. So unfortunately, to compromise, only white women were given the opportunity. Early in the 19th century, a black feminist, Sojourner Truths, gave a famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" at the Women's Conventions in Akron, Ohio in 1851. Which pointed out the hypocrisy at the notion of only white women votes, but to no avail. Back over in Australia, Edith Cowan was the first woman elected to Australian Parliament in 1920. She's now forever represented on our $50 bill. So as this wave was gaining momentum, in the late 19th century, many women and men started to be opposed to suffrage. I mean, they were always opposed, but like the movement really started heating up. These anti-suffragists, mostly conservative, already believed that women were quote-unquote equal in their own spheres, without needing the right to vote. They sought to protect women's defined spheres, motherhood, education, philanthropy, etc. Some women saw it as an opposition of God's will, which sounds really dumb, but many anti-suffragists felt it would be the end of quote-unquote true motherhood, which nowadays and age just sounds stupid. The first wave of feminism was by no way a flawless wave, but it did a lot considering the circumstances and the amount of time and effort that went into producing such simple equality. It did a lot, and it really got the snowball rolling for the next couple of waves. The next wave focused on cleaning up after the previous one, which would become a trend in the next coming waves, and drew in women of all colours and developing nations claiming, "Women's struggle is a class struggle." Feminists spoke of women as a social class and coined phrases like, "the personal is political and identity politics," in an effort to demonstrate that race, class, and gender oppression are all related. So as it turns out, war is really good for feminism. After the Second World War, women again showed that they could break out of gender roles when required. Simone de Beauvoir's 1949 book, The Second Sex, was groundbreaking. It questioned how society viewed women and the role they played, quoting, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." This wave peaked in around the 1960s, along with the civil rights movement, both movements looking for a share in what can easily be called, "Hey, you're hogging some of that equality pie, give us some." Now the second wave focused on issues of equality, discrimination, sexual and reproductive rights, outlaw marital rape, raise awareness about domestic violence, stop forced sterilization, lift the marriage bar, legislate sexual harassment, and I'm sure a bunch of other just normal human rights. I would argue that the most influential feminist of this wave was probably Betty Friedan, who wrote the most influential book of the 20th century, mine, The Feminist Mystique, in 1963, which criticised the idea that women could only find happiness in child spawning and homemaking. The book spread like an Australian bushfire, not because of its thinking, but mainly because of its reach. A lot of middle-class women would hand out the book to one another and then pass it on. After the success of Friedan's book, she joined the National Organization for Women, and the first legislative victory was the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Following the success of this era was the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964, and following that the Voting Rights Act in 1965. During this wave is where you see the split in feminist ideologies. On one hand you've got the equal rights, older, white, upper middle class women that wanted legislation of abortion, equal pay, better establishment in the workforce. On the other hand, you've got the radical feminists, younger and minority women of all ages active in the civil rights movement, which wanted more radical change to the society that fundamentally saw it as patriarchal, and needed to be altered if women were to escape its oppression. A radical New York group, the Red Stockings, staged a counter-pageant at the 1960 Miss America pageant, where they crowned a sheep Miss America and threw away oppressive feminine stuff, bras, high heels, makeup and shit. Over in the green and gold, we also had the second wave, believe it or not. It started around the same time, sort of around the same shit. My personal hero, Germaine Greer, the best feminist of all time, rose to international prominence during this wave, and we'll get back to it later. In 1962, Indigenous Australians obtained the right to enrol and vote in federal elections, and in 1967, the Constitution referendum recognised Indigenous Australians as citizens, and they were included in the census. The second wave didn't do that much for Indigenous women. It wasn't a movement against men, but more against a racist white society that stole their children from their families and pride from their men. If you ask me, I'd say this wave was the best in feminist history. It achieved a lot considering the small amount of time and maybe arguably the small amount of effort compared to the previous wave. It achieved so much and it gained so much for society in general. I'd like to end this segment with a quote from Friedan. "Men are not the enemy, but the fellow victims. The real enemy is women's denigration of themselves." The third wave started around 1990, sort of, if you can call this a wave. This one more attempted to pick up the slack of the last wave, of course it did. They argued that race, ethnicity, class, religion, gender, and nationality were all relevant when discussing feminism, and destabilized notions of universal womanhood, body, gender, sexuality, and heteronormativity. They adopted derogatory terms like slut and bitch in order to deprive sexist culture of these slurs. They readopted girly traits and believed rejection of such traits was in itself misogynistic, which bewildered their second wave mothers. While on the subject of derogatory terms, this is the right way to not stop them from being used, but take away all their power. Unlike modern leftists, who are just outright banning those words, you can't say that, the feelings. If you know, you had a ball sack, metaphorically or otherwise, you'd realize that you can just let these words go, because at the end of the day, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. There were two different cultural aspects to the third wave. One of them was the punk rock aspect, counterculture, and was very prominent at the time. One band, Riot Girl, addressed issues such as rape, domestic abuse, sexuality, racism, patriarchism, classism, anarchism, and female empowerment. The other was the Clarence Thomas incident, where President Bush nominated Thomas to the US Supreme Court, where his good character was being presented as the primary qualification, since he'd only been a judge for just over a year. There had been little opposition to his nomination until a private interview with Antia Hill was leaked to the public, stating she was sexually harassed by him. A feminist, Rebecca Walker, wrote an article in Miss Magazine, Becoming the Third Wave, where she speaks about the Clarence Thomas incident and how despite the claims he ended up in the Supreme Court, her piece was a rally to all women. 1992 was called the Year of the Woman, after 24 women won seats in the House of Representatives and 3 in the Senate. And it plateaued after. This wave came full circle back from the second wave. In the second wave you had the Miss America pageant where they're throwing away bras and lipstick, and feminists don't need these because they label them as objects of the patriarchy. In this wave, well, some women liked that sort of girliness, because why not? Yay, and now we've made it to the current wave, and unless you've been living under the guy who lives under a rock, you've probably heard of man-hating, drinking male tears, fighting against the patriarchy again, body positivity, and just this whole far-left mess. In 2006, Tarana Burke first used the hashtag #MeToo on MySpace, where you can also follow this channel. It was founded to help survivors of sexual violence, particularly black and young women of low-wealth communities. In 2012, in response to the shooting of a 12-year-old boy, Tamir Rice, Black Lives Matter started, which has grown along with the leftist movement. The LGBTQIAPK took off after Caitlyn Jenner publicly came out in 2015 as a transgender woman, and was a hero to everyone. Along with this new movement were transgender women going into, well, women-only sports, and totally not dominating the competition with their previous male genes. Gay marriage finally became a thing. That took far too long. In 2017, a day after Trump's inauguration, we got this gem.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. Mr. Trump, for the moment.
4.6 million people marched in protest, making it the largest in American history. Alyssa Milano posted hashtag #MeToo on Twitter. Other actresses followed, and it popped off around the world literally overnight. The witch hunt had begun, and it soon consumed Weinstein, then Cosby, and so now under this movement we've got the gays, got the LGBTQ, got the asexuals, we've got the minorities. Everyone's floating underneath this umbrella. And companies thought it'd be good to take advantage of all this this wokeness and post their rainbow filter over their company logo to show that they actually give a shit. Spoiler, they don't. Hillary and then Warren try to rally women to vote a woman into presidency, not on their policies or anything, just the fact that they were women, not because they were good politicians in any way, shape or form. Jermaine Greer, the hero I was talking about, had this very savage thing to say. Tarana Burke had this to say on Me Too recently.
Right now, the conversation is mired in misconceptions. Folks think that this is about naming and shaming. They think it's about taking down powerful men. But they're wrong. Even the women who came forward around Harvey Weinstein didn't ask for what happened to him. They didn't even think it was possible. They were simply trying to be heard and trying to be seen and believed.
We had this very hilarious body positivity shit that's still going on for whatever reason. During all of the Trump 2016 fiasco is where this silliness got extra out of hand. And like moths to a fire, you couldn't help but get trolled. Most of these trolls took pretty much zero to little effort. But you SJWs, you just went full fucking retard and made this whole wave look like a circus. In my opinion,
you're fucking a white male!
All the waves have played their part in creating the society that we live in today. But at which point do we stop? What's the end game? Until patriarchy is dismantled, in which case who and how do you define them?
How long must we wait for men and boys to stop murdering us, to stop beating us, and to stop raping us? How many rapists must we kill? Not the state, because I disagree with the death penalty, and I want to get rid of incarceration, and I'm with you on the police. So, I want women themselves. As a woman, I'm asking, how many rapists must we kill until men stop raping us?
This wave had the potential to be the greatest of them all. Inclusion, acceptance, love. Not one of exclusion, denial, and hate. I don't believe this wave has been that horrible though. There have been some victories, but it's also neglected the growing pains of a changing society. As always, don't subscribe, dislike the video, and comment below.